Ladies and gentlemen, at the very first, I will give you warm welcome here at my hometown on behalf of the Lord Mayor, Mr. Dirk Hilbert of this city, and of course of myself. Until the tremendous flood in 2002, in August 2002, and until the so-called 1,000-year drought in 2003. Only a few have been talking about climate change. This is over. The city of Dresden and its citizens have been consternated in a direct and even very personal manner, and with 4 victims and a total damage of 1.3 billion euro in one night. We have learned a bitter lesson. Climate change is going to concern our whole urban life. The City Council discussed this item and gave us order to continue climate protection at the one hand and to develop and work out a strategy for making the city of Dresden fit for a future with short resources and with changed climate. We did it very practically at first. It was indisputable that we needed an improved system for flood protection. That was the starting point. We did it with good cooperation, newly started, with our Czech partners upstream of the Elbe River. We improved flood predictions by a direct access to Czech raw data in the waterboards. We erected retention basins and flood polders. We erected flood protection walls and re-established vivid watercourses which have been forced to be under the ground for years before. And so we learned that with minimum additional efforts, it is possible to gain attractive additional benefits. By these experiences, and by the wise decision of our city council and the funds provided, we've got the opportunity to give the blue and the green infrastructure much more space in town, which is to a high grade competitive, of course. The idea of multifunctional use of this space, the idea of the development of an ecological net was born in 2005. But we fell into a dilemma with city planning goals. The demands of economic efficiency, maybe for water supply, for public transport and so on. They all call for compact towns, for compact cities with high density of utilization. The climate change calls for more space, and so we had to find a synthesis. The idea was the existing urban settlements, which are the gray cells here in the slides, are to be further condensed and embedded in a network of multifunctional green belts, which are designed for providing a variety of fresh air, of benefits as fresh air, as clean drinking water, flood prevention, flood protection, which are making the city more resilient and more beautiful too. The 450 kilometers of urban watercourses in Dresden form the base of our ecological net. Fortunately, at this point, our work became big support. It got big support. It became part of a big research project titled Developing and Testing of an Integrated Regional Climate Change Adaptation Program for the region of Dresden, short RECLAM named. It was a stakeholder approach, and you can see these stakeholders here on the slide. We had partners, the think tanks as Leibniz Institute of Ecological and Regional Planning, Technical University Dresden, and as well practitioners and decision makers in this consortium. And we have been working successful over 5 years to implement not only these ideas, but to investigate how can we find the optimum solution for the region, and the core of the region is the city of Dresden, for future development with changed conditions I mentioned before. In the RECLAM project, among others, the effect of Sunette on local climate was investigated. You can see here in red how in summer nights fresh air flows along the green belts downtown, cooling down the residential areas heated up during hot summer days. Within the area we are now here, this is within this rectangular area here, we have 2 watercourses. This is the Weißeritz River, and this is the Karlsbach River. Here's our museum. The Karlsbach River has severely damaged this museum in 2002. And so we started to protect it. And I show you an example for such multifunctional purpose of our area. This has been a park. We have digged and lowered the level of this park by 3 to 4 meters. And now this park is a retention basin for 30,000 cubic meters of stormwater retention. And you can see how it works. Meanwhile, it's not only a park and a retention pond, it's additional area for the survival of amphibians. Meanwhile, this museum is protected in a reliable manner for flooding again. Another example, much more instructive than this, has been established as a quite new green link in the former bed of the Weißeritz River. In 1893, the city of Dresden decided to change the flow direction of the Weißeritz River and use this bed for industrial purposes. The factories have been destroyed by flood in 2002. We have bought them and demolished, lowered the ground, and developed a green belt from the inner city of Dresden to the outskirts, which gives a lot of benefits. On Friday, you are invited to come and see what we have done there and how it works as an instructive example. at this excursion Weißeritz Greenbelt. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We are shifting to a completely different topic, as Professor said, so I will try to make the link with climate change. We were managing the excess of water, and now we will manage the water scarcity in a different way. So, the World Water Development Report, I think it will be cited several times in this conference, because it has emphasized one important thing, which is tapping in a new resource, which is wastewater. And wastewater is a reality. The availability is a reality, while the availability of water is just a mirage, like some people have said. So we have to tap in this new resource. And Tunisia has been cited in this report as one of the examples of one of the countries that has a long history in reusing wastewater. And actually in Tunisia, we are reusing wastewater since a long time, and it is included in our policy, water policy, and also it's a priority for the National Development Plan for the next 5 years. So one of the success stories in Tunisia is just located here. Oh, the pointer? Yeah, here in a city called, in a governorate called Monastir, more particularly in a city called Ouardanin. This is just 130 kilometers from the capital, Tunis, and this is how this landscape looks like some years ago. Actually, in this area, agriculture was rain-fed, and farmers there were growing just olive trees, based on collection of water in a kind of impluvium, kind of muscat. In addition to that, the groundwater there was salinized, so there were no alternative water resources. In addition, the farmers were complaining about the quality of the soil. So all these factors has resulted in limited resources to the farmers. And in addition to that, when the city has been sewered, so the treatment plant started discharging the effluent and the sewage sludge in the surrounding area, which has caused several nuisances. So the farmer there started complaining, and they claimed something very interesting, which is the creation of the irrigated area, established in '94, and currently it's covering about 75 hectares. And here are some pictures showing how the transformation is big in this area. So you see that geranium is grown there as an industrial plant, which is allowed by the national regulation. The farmers there are growing fruit trees, mainly peaches, and also they establish nurseries, so they are using sewage sludge as a substrate there, and they are also growing roses under greenhouses. In the bottom, you can see how the sewage sludge was managed in 2004, actually. It was just discharged in the waterways and had caused several problems. While now it is mixed, they are producing kind of compost, and they are using it for the nursery. So you see how big is the change in this area. When we look at the wide picture, we see perfectly the nexus here, in that the wastewater there is providing the water, providing nutrient, organic matter, which is good for the soil. And also it's producing sewage sludge, which is used to improve the soil quality. So when we improve the soil quality, we improve the yield, and we improve the farmer's income, which is perfectly in line with SDGs. Our case study is also addressing SDG, as I have said, so you guessed that the SDG 6 in one of them. More specifically, the target 6.3 related to water quality and reuse. Actually, in this area, wastewater is secondary treated, so, and in Tunisia, it is just good to irrigate for restricted irrigation. So, and the quality there is not that good, so the farmers try to improve the quality through some devices like a storage basin, like, as you can see here, a net. So there are very simple things, much more complicated, like this battery filter. So all this has improved the quality and reduced the burden to health and the environment. In addition to SDG 6, there are several other SDGs addressed here, as you can see. So introducing the wastewater in this area has introduced, completely transformed an economical, environmental, and social level. So as the wastewater treatment plant was installed there, and the farmers started reusing the wastewater, so the discharge to the environment has been tremendously reduced, and also reduced the discharge of sewage sludge. And this has improved the public health, obviously, and since we have more water, the farmer adopted new crops, so the cropping system there has completely changed. As you can see, there were only olive trees, and now they have different kind of crops to rely on. And when we produce a lot of crops, we think about marketing. So this has opened new markets and new opportunities of commercialization in the region. And obviously, this has they have produced new sources of revenue to the farmers, and they started thinking about investments. So many of them started buying agricultural land, and they started investment even in business. So it was really prosperous era for them. In addition to that, there were new job opportunities for skilled and unskilled people. And just to mention that one of the farmers there had a son who is an agricultural engineer, and he's growing actually these roses in greenhouses. So you see how is integrated this project in this region. The implementation of this project was guaranteed through the involvement of different stakeholders and decision makers, obviously. So in Tunisia, wastewater reuse is under the umbrella of the Ministry of Agriculture, obviously, who is in charge of the monitoring and in addition to other ministries like public health and so on. And actually, even research is involved there to deal with some particular issues. At the regional level, we had the Ministry of Agriculture represented by what we call CRDA, which is the Department of Agricultural Development. And this department is in close relation with the Farmer Association, what we call GDA, which is located at the local level. So there is a strong collaboration between them. Well, a strong collaboration that needs to be strengthened, actually. But this is how things work there, and this is perfectly in line with the SDG 17 regarding the partnership. And I would like to conclude with these few ideas that actually came out of the farmers themselves to improve the situation in the area. So I call them project opportunities because they are very interesting. So nutrient recovery needs more attention, and farmers were claiming tools to evaluate how nutrients we are bringing to the soil and how they are taking. So we need to make like a balance to see what is in and what is coming out. In addition to that, farmers are claiming unrestricted irrigation because they are using drip irrigation. So they would like to have, let's say, more acceptability from the social part. So this will secure more the commercialization of their product. And also we need to assess this business model to see how sustainable it is. And finally, governance needs to be strengthened also at different levels. And I would like to conclude with this very nice picture that I took last week from this irrigated area. And thank you.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. So I would like to present the second case study, which is focusing on a stakeholder participation and implementation of climate change adaptation strategies in the Czech Republic. So first, I would like to know that unlike Germany, these efforts started in the Czech Republic only recently, because the national adaptation strategy was endorsed by government in 2015. And second note is that this is more like a research-based perspective where we tried to support climate change adaptation in cities by some scientific approaches. So actually this case study is based on a so-called Urban Adapt project, which was a 2-year project coordinated by Czech Globe, where we also involved partners from cities, NGOs and academia. And the major aim was to support the development of urban adaptation strategies, especially by using also ecosystem-based approaches to adaptation. So we have been focusing on 3 pilot cities in the Czech Republic. This was Prague, Brno, and Plzeň. All these cities together comprise approximately 20% of the Czech population. So these are among the largest cities in the Czechia. And in promoting the adaptation planning, we applied adaptation cycle framework, which is comprising of 6 steps, beginning by the preparatory phase, climate change vulnerability assessment, identifying adaptation needs, assessing adaptation measures, designing adaptation strategies, and last but not least, implementation and monitoring. So during this adaptation cycle planning, one of the quite strong components in the project was involvement of stakeholders or participation of key stakeholders in cities. And so we involve stakeholders in all phases, and especially first for identifying major risks and current and future problems connected to climate change. Then we also try to develop some shared vision for cities, because cities are also changing due to other reasons than climate change. And then we also involved stakeholders in rating of different adaptation options for the cities, and try to somehow elicit preferences towards some concrete adaptation measures. Just to give you a notion about the composition of stakeholders or participants in this project, we had of course city representatives, also regional authorities, universities, academic sector, also private and business, ministries and government institutions, project partners, which, as I said, was quite a diverse mixture, and also NGOs and water management companies. So this we've got quite broad participation in this adaptation planning process. So first area of problems was the identification of current and future risks. So what we did is that we somehow confronted all stakeholders with current scientific knowledge about climate change impacts and vulnerabilities, of course using some climate change modeling and vulnerability assessment and also other inputs. And then we asked the stakeholders what they think is the most pressing problem in the city concerning climate change adaptation. And so what the participants perceived as one of the most important risks is the risk connected to heat. That means heat waves and urban heat islands. So these rank highest. Also, they perceived as important risk connected to runoff. That is stormwater, sustainable water management, or all issues related to water. Then there were also some problems which were not perceived as such important, but they are still quite important for the cities: drinking water, the groundwater or surface water. Then, of course, the green infrastructure or urban green areas, and of course also floods, which are still quite important in the context of many cities. What's interesting is also the relative difference between current state and future development. So you can see that, for example, floods have almost the same importance in present as well as in future. But there are some phenomena which are quite changing, where the perception is quite changing. For example, heat waves or drinking water in future have been perceived as a bigger problem than today. So then we also involved stakeholders in rating or assessing the adaptation options, adaptation measures, and we've been interested especially in ecosystem-based approaches. And this is just the example, because they rated several aspects of adaptation measures, like cost, if it's high or low, time demand, how fast we can implement adaptation options, and also technical difficulty, is it just a partial measure, or if we need to restructure the whole city, for example. And so we, as you can see from this graph, majority of these options are at the scale of a rather like a medium difficulty to implement. So the participants perceive it's not so, actually it's not so demanding probably to implement some of these adaptation measures for climate adaptation planning, like green roofs, green walls, some blue infrastructure elements, urban gardening, sustainable drainage system, permeable surfaces, or infiltration beds. So what's the current stage of implementation of adaptation strategies in the city? So actually, within this Urban Adapt project, we prepared some background and basis for adaptation planning. In these documents, we identify risks and vulnerabilities. We propose some adaptation measures based also on the stakeholder perception, illustrate the feasibility of these ecosystem-based solutions. And important part is also proposal for indicators for monitoring progress and some examples of financial tools for implementation. And of course, the aim is to integrate adaptation into decision-making in cities, which of course has not been addressed before to this extent. So, and of course, in different cities, there are different approaches to adaptation planning, because the situation on each city is different. For example, Prague already joined the Mayor's Adapt or Covenant of Mayor initiative, and they have a proposal for the adaptation strategy. In Brno, we assisted Brno city with the preparation of guidelines for adaptation, and in Pilsen they have a document highlighting the potential for adaptation, which would be used also for the strategic plan of the city. So I would like also to mention some linkages to SDGs and Nexus Approach. Clearly there are links to SDG Goal 11, sustainable cities and communities to support the integrated adaptation and mitigation planning. Also there is link to climate action to strengthen the adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards, and by promoting these ecosystem-based approaches, there is also a link to SDG 15, life on land, using also benefiting biodiversity and ecosystem services. Actually, we haven't addressed, within this project, we haven't addressed the Nexus Approach, but there are some links also to this Nexus Approach, especially to water. One of the most pressing issues was this sustainable drainage systems, rainwater management. Concerning the floods, now Prague is proved to 500-year flood because there was a quite good learning from the past, even in 2002. So there are links to ecosystem services, to One Green, and we have a study where we found that people in Brno recognize somehow the value of ecosystem services, and there are also links to other Nexus topics. So conclusions. So what I have shown that climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction presents integrated approach to urban resilience. What's important is to involve from the very beginning all key stakeholders, incorporate their visions and needs, get support of so-called local champions, and by implementing nature-based solutions, we also promote co-op benefits and multifunctionality of urban areas. So thank you for your attention.
So it has nothing to do that women are sitting on one side and men on the other side. I think this is quite successful in a lot of such meetings. We have gray-haired men sitting in the round, so it's an improvement that we, yeah, okay. So I think this is the right time now to reflect a bit what happened throughout the day. It's not simply the last session, it's also the rich presentations we got in the 8 parallel sessions. And I would like, before we start, a broader discussion involving also the audience. I would like to ask Ruth Erlbeck from GIZ to start, and then Rudolph, you will follow. Ruth, please.
Yeah, but what do you want to hear from me?
Your reflections and comments.
Okay. Yeah, well, as was said before, I work in the region of Southeast Asia, so I would reflect it a bit more on that background and sort of asking myself and considering together with you, so what we heard now, these 3 examples, how can we transfer them to the countries in Southeast Asia, talking about Asia Pacific. So I would say one main issue, and at this moment I would concentrate on the examples of Prague and Dresden. Of course, one main problem of the cities in South and Southeast Asia is, of course, their autonomy. I mean, they do not have the autonomy cities in Germany have. They have very limited mandates and they have very limited access to finance. I was very impressed about, for example, the modeling systems you were explaining you had you are having in Prague. This would, of course, be also very useful for cities in South and Southeast Asia, in particular for the coastal areas, but normally there is not the finance for doing that. Of course, there is not always the capacity, and for doing that kind of modeling, of course, you need data, and there we come to the problem of baseline data. We come to the SDGs in this context also. What do you do if very important data you need to go for modeling, to go for the implementation, and then finally the monitoring of the SDGs if these data are not available? So there we have still quite a long way to go. But on the other hand, we had a very interesting discussion today with regard to infrastructure and how it is if, for example, people come up with very nice and green ideas to modernize the physical infrastructure. In that case, it was the wastewater system in Munich, which is a functioning system. So nobody would actually understand why you should go for innovative, decentralized approaches over here in Germany, in our cities, because I think we have a connection rate of wastewater, this is 90-something%. If we look at the developing countries, we see that the majority of the infrastructure which needs to be built until 2030 and 2050 still has to be built. So there we sort of have large opportunities to come up with innovative nexus ideas, I would say innovative technologies, thinking about wastewater and the link of wastewater, reusing it for surface water and agriculture, as was shown by you, but I would go further. I would also go for the link to energy. I assume you did not do that because the volume is not enough, but then that would be sort of the next link to also connect it to energy, to go for energy production. And I think there we have a huge potential and huge opportunities which so far have not been used, but which are being discovered more and more. And I do think putting this in the framework of the SDGs and the New Urban Agenda, it helps us because the countries now, all countries are now sort of obliged, I would say. Of course, it's a moral obligation, but still they have to report yearly on what they're doing in the context of the SDGs. And we all know that the SDG number 11, cities should become more livable, that the SDG 6 and 7, that's water and energy, are extremely important. We certainly sort of have another advantage over here. This is sort of the rule of law, or the compliance, or at least normally the compliance with existing rules, with existing standards. These are issues which still have to be further improved and worked on, and of course, in particular, institutional set up in order to, yes, get the push and implement the Nexus approach in the emerging markets and the developing countries, but I think the chances are very good. I would leave it here for the moment.
Thank you very much. Probably one question back to you. How do you link it with the other pillar of today when we are talking about resilient city? How would you link up with that in monitoring and implementation purposes?
Yeah, well, I mean, linking it up with resilience, I think there are two issues. Cities, yes, have to become more resilient. We saw this even in the case of Prague and Dresden, but of course in the developing countries or emerging markets, cities even more urgently have to become resilient, but in two ways. The resilience is once the software part of it, as one of our moderators said today. This is the whole governance aspect, and it starts off with, well, it starts off with good governance, but being more concrete, we have to have the respective framework conditions, you have to get the tariffs right in order to promote energy efficient use of resources like water and energy. This is sort of the software part of it, and the hardware part, we have to improve the infrastructure as such. We need resilient infrastructure, coming once more back to flooding, which is a huge problem in Southeast Asia. You might know that Southeast Asia is the most disaster-prone area of the world, talking about typhoons, talking about earthquakes, talking about flooding. So we have to go for flooding, for systems which are flood resilient, or at least more flood resilient. And I think there again the issue of wastewater and separation of storm and wastewater is a huge and very, very important issue. So somehow the problem always comes back to water and wastewater.
Thank you very much. Rudolph, your observations.
Thank you, first of all, to the presenters. That was really a trigger moment. I'll go back a little bit further, as was suggested. When you look at the banner on your right-hand side or your left-hand side, you look at the top of that banner, it says something like SDGs and Nexus monitoring and implementation. So we actually don't need much of a dialogue on what is the difference between the Nexus and IVRM or other approaches. What we do need to do here is get to the point as how to translate, and those are the gems I picked up early this morning, how to translate our intentions, our cases, into a language that will trigger a politician whether local, regional, or national, into securing investments into the agenda that we're fostering here. And I think that is the overriding issue and principle we may want to illustrate with our cases and what have you. So for me, the idea is how can we, and I don't know how many politicians are actually in the room from the different levels I mentioned, but how can we reach out of the water box? Because there's not much of an energy box today, there's not much of a soil box today. I'm not sure we have plenty of food box around us. So how can we, other than a Happy Meal, but how can we reach out of our own boxes, talk, and then accompany the politicians at those three levels of going forward? And in that context, I think there was several remarks early this morning, distinguished speakers, that related to fear of future triggering change, but also we've heard opportunities for innovation as a driver to get to these water investments. We've heard statements around that national security depends on the resilience of cities to climate variability. Well, half of the world population is already in cities, and most of that half is where Ruth lives. And they are indeed into deep S and then whatever letters, but it's a four-letter word, right? So here again, what can the Nexus approach do to boost that resilience? We've heard some, I think, very strong advocacy around people-centered disaster risk reduction and moving from grey or brown infrastructure to, if you want, informed institutions, green infrastructure, and particularly interaction with stakeholders of different levels of information. We've heard about low-hanging fruit, Fritz. Smart building codes might help both for mitigation and adaptation. And I must say that the poster sessions were very enriching in that sense as well. And actually they addressed the issue of the nexus of water and soils and waste more than the sessions I was able to attend, but that doesn't mean that that wasn't the overriding one. Shocks can trigger change. Well, here in Dresden, I think you were at spearheading the change of government in the federal system in Germany. We've heard other contributions. That's in India, for instance, it's the choked transportation that may well have triggered in a governmental move towards navigation and hence the whole nexus of upstream storage and what have you not. So that's what we've had. But there's also a question around who's here to have had it. And I think, but that's my limitation maybe, that I've been missing a more pronounced participation so far of parliamentarians. I don't know how many parliamentarians or ex-parliamentarians we have in this distinguished audience. I see no hands going up, so maybe they're sitting on them. Or the judiciary, because we talk of rule of law, and that's particularly important for financial stability. I don't know how many trillions we're looking at that we need to mobilize. I'm very glad that there are representations of municipal offices here and the technical units, and maybe even mayors from the different areas. Fritz, I'm not so sure we have the finance sector here in the room today. So it's not so much sitting on our hands or laurels, it's also asking ourselves a bit of a critical question, well, who have we not yet in this second DNC been able to reach out to? I think when I come to this, very useful, you found this on your chairs, right? I can only agree to it. I must admire the people who have brought this together because they were able to do it in a politically correct way, whereas the sessions sometimes had very much more fire in the exchange that I witnessed than was captured so far. So if there's a second round, I'll come back to some other more detailed issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rudolph. I think we should open up the discussion now to the audience, to use the remaining time to get your comments and your questions. And what I think is important to see the relation of the sessions we had today to the SDG monitoring, implementation, as well if it comes to land use, multifunctional land use, and if it comes to resilient city. And there we would be really interested to get from your side an echo where what you learned today and where are proposals or suggestions for next steps, even if you are not the last day, but we are wrapping up the session for today. What is, from your point of view, important to take on board? Who serves as the icebreaker?
Stefan Ulmbrock, World Water Assessment Program. I found it very interesting, particularly also the case study, beautiful case study from Tunisia, and referencing the World Water Development Report, very nice, but it was such a fantastic, positive story, so I was wondering why is it like this? And very honestly, in our report, when we did the research on it, we also reported on less successful cases, also from some neighboring countries, I don't want to mention them. And part of the reason that the reuse scheme was not so successful, for instance, in aquaculture, there was an example where they reused wastewater, but the fish, even they were controlled, they were healthy, there was no problem with it, but they were not sold on the local market because the awareness was not there. People didn't know, education was missing. And there were many aspects, so the system failed. It was beautifully designed, controlled and everything, but still the market, the people didn't take it up. So what is the reason for success, besides that you did everything technically sound, but why was it so successful? And what was the role of awareness raising and educating the public on your activities?
Olfa, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, this case study looks successful because behind there are farmers who made the success. And the farmers, they claim that the success of this region belongs to them. So the acceptability in this region is very high on the side of farmers, not the society. Because the farmer, they claim that they have still some obstacles in selling their fruit on the market. Because people there, they identify the fruit coming from the irrigated area. So social acceptability in Tunisia is still a problem that had to be addressed seriously. Recently, we had the very first study on social acceptability of reuse, and you can imagine all the factors that contributed to this hindrance. What has made the success of this area is also that there are no alternative water resources, so the farmer there, they feel the threat. And when you feel the threat, you have to cope with that, and you have to find solutions. And in addition to that, there were farmers who were leading. So there were people who showed the good example there, and they said that this works. Why not you? So they are leading, and they are showing the good thing to do in terms of technical things, in terms of marketing. So there are key lessons that we have to learn from this case study. Obviously, there are other things that have to be improved, but you can, in my last slide, I showed different, let's say, projects that could be conducted there. So, and these are coming from the farmers, not only from us. So the farmers, they have new ideas to expand the activity there, so there are a lot to do. So I would stop here.
So it was not difficult for farmers to leave the olive crops and to, instead of olive crops, move to the kind of domestic agricultural nexus with the different possibilities?
It was not so difficult because they've seen the benefit. And when you talk about money, so the farmers, they have very big eyes. How can I do it? How can I get more money? So you can imagine that the price of the land there, the agricultural land, has increased exponentially. And this is, I mean, a driver to reuse in that region. So if the farmer, they see that their neighbors are doing good, they want to do the same thing.
Okay, I think you add an element if it comes to implementation, which is really important. We also need incentives if we like to get things moving and SDGs implemented. Rudolph, let me come back. What about incentives? How would you elaborate on that?
Well, I guess incentives for transformational change, as illustrated in the case of Tunisia, have to do indeed with education. I found the illustration very powerful from Tunisia, where not only poverty was addressed, but the whole aspect of dignity and innovation was maybe hidden in so many slides. But once people get that drive, and as Olfa explained, once you have your local leaders, that is usually a driver of change. Further to incentives, everybody is talking about fiscal incentives, and there's tons of them because there's these north-south transfers in the form of grants or subsidized loans or whatever blended products that these days are so strongly in demand. But the case of water, soil and waste definitely needs a lot of consumer attention. And if there's one thing missing in our water engineering world, it's understanding consumers. We don't really know how they tick, and yet the water resource world and the wash world relate to their final audience as if it were a group of easy followers, because the technicians are well intended in their change. I don't want to elaborate further on incentives. I think a congress like this is a magnificent incentive to take the knowledge and engage other stakeholders on that knowledge and test it and see how smart this is for them. If we ever get to an incentive that we really reflect what is so smart, then we can probably deliver faster on the SDGs. I'll leave it.
Ruth, about incentives.
Yes, I tried to touch upon it already in my first intervention, but I want to emphasize once more. I mean, talking about incentives in the context of if we want to take the Nexus approach serious, and the background of the Nexus approach is that we have to economize on the resources like water, energy, and land and food, because they are getting more and more scarce, as we know, and they're going to, if we continue with business as usual, we will end up by 2030 with 30 and 40% more use of water, energy, and land, and this is just not possible. So in order to go for resource efficiency or economizing on the use of water and energy and land, we have to go for other tariffs. I mean, water has to become more expensive. People have to notice that water is a precious good, and the same refers to the use of energy. In the area, Southeast Asia, the prices for water, for energy are still completely subsidized. I know that now the argument of poverty comes in, and I know it is a very serious argument, no doubt, but I do think that the tariffs have to be consumption-oriented and cost recovery, and for the poorer strata of the society, you can go, or you have to go then for subsidization schemes. But at this moment, you have the subsidization schemes for everybody, and that really does not make sense, and that is extremely negative with regard to the resources mentioned. And talking once more about land use, I mean, land is a very, very scarce issue, and we also have to think about technologies there which economize more on land use. If we look at the traditional conventional wastewater treatment plants we have, they consume huge areas of land, and that was also in one of the presentations today mentioned. This land is not anymore available in South and Southeast Asia, and the same refers to dumping sites. In the majority of the areas of South and Southeast Asia, you have dumping sites, and sometimes they are landfills, and if we're very lucky we have sanitary landfills. They consume huge areas of land which are spoiled for 30, 40 years even after they have been closed down. So we have to look at that, and we have to find solutions for that, and that is combined with incentives.
Okay, I think we leave it for a minute, because if we are discussing the issue of economizing, we also have to discuss the issue of affordability at the same time. But I think I leave it for the moment. We can come back to it. I would like to ask colleagues in the auditorium for questions and comments.
My name is Joanna Vinke de Kruijf, University of Twente, the Netherlands. I gave a presentation myself on climate change adaptation in cities, and I enjoyed listening to the presentations, especially the ones on climate change adaptation, which resonates a lot with the work I've done. And it also made me wonder about the implementability of the Nexus approach, because both your presentations was on climate change adaptation, but why do they not pay attention in making these plans for climate change adaptation? Why don't they pay attention to mitigation or to circular economy or to other aspects of the Nexus? So I think it could be because it gets so complicated and not implementable anymore. So I would like the speakers and maybe the rest of the panel to reflect a bit on the implementability of truly integrated approaches in planning and Thank you.
Will you start with that, please?
Okay, and thank you for the question. Of course, the implementation is the difficult side of integrated strategies and such as climate change adaptation. So, of course, in preparation of climate adaptation plans in the Czech Republic, of course, there were discussed also related approaches such as climate change mitigation, nature conservation, and other aspects of urban planning. Going back to this, I can also reflect on session B1 on urban resilience when you had a talk, very interesting, and I learned from this session, where I've also been directly involved, that there are multiple perspectives on resilience. And of course, we can take perspective of water security or waste, food waste, or there is also governance aspects, etc. And I think that the really full implementation of this integrated planning is still a challenge, and I think it's not happening yet. So that's my reflection of this. So this is still a challenge.
Thank you very much. Rudolph?
Yeah, thank you for your question. The perception that it's too complex to be handled is maybe something that may lead to another quotation in your research papers. But I can well understand that local mayors and people who work at the local level are baffled by all these water directives we get from either Brussels or from Kathmandu or wherever they come from. So they need to team up. They need to team up with other local administrations of smaller and medium-sized cities. In Spanish, you call it mancomunidades. In any other language, you can understand that it's maybe a temporary association of similar interests that are perceived to be beneficial. So, is the Nexus too complex to be handled? I think it depends very much on the level. It's at the top level, the ministries that are siloed up, where we may find most resistance to Nexus approaches. As you go down to practice, I would expect that there is less theoretical and institutional debate. It's just like, let's get it done. So I know it's not easy, for sure. Just as much as IVRM is not easy. Anything that involves a party of three, and we were reminded this morning by the director of the TU, I guess, that it takes three for a company. I think we have to just learn that we have to get out of the business as usual, out of our silos, into the value add of involvement of multi-stakeholder platforms, of the involvement of parties that were so far not in our water box.
I think what is important, not to use complexity to shy away from finding solutions. I think what I think is a challenge for the whole SDG issue. How are we able to ensure a certain coherence between the different measures to avoid what Nicolas Forer said this morning, that you get unintended consequences or collateral damage because you're not working in understanding the system you're working in. I think this is something what complexity should be not an issue to shy away from finding a solution. Christian.
Thank you. From my experience, Rudolph, you're right. The practitioner in a city, the man who is, or the woman who is responsible for future city planning, of course thinks in categories like Nexus. Otherwise he couldn't do his work. But and we have in developed countries a very high level of knowledge. It's not a lack of knowledge our problem, and sometimes not a lack of money. The problem is that we have to transport the idea to the decision makers and make the decision makers able to decide. And they decide if you can catch them with issues which are important in the theory or the practice today or tomorrow within the election period. That's practical, typical. And if you have a catastrophe, a shock, then I want to encourage everybody takes opportunity. For 60 years in the city of Dresden, nobody has invested in water courses. They have been neglected. We have built streets and all these things, but nobody did anything for water courses. After the flood, we had the ideas, the plans, and now we got money for a short period, but we got it. And then you can develop examples that show it's possible. And then it's important to find the right wording, not to speak about environmental protection or all these things, sondern to speak about competitive chances of the city with regard to other cities in the world, with regard to near future. We all are in competition with regard to working places, with economic benefits and all these things. And so we said, we want to make the city fit for a future with changed climate, but at first with short resources. And so politicians said, okay, this is a term we know, and we will do anything for this.
Okay, Ruth?
Yeah, well, I think you're completely right. These windows of opportunity, they are extremely important. Unfortunately, this is often a crisis, which gives us a window of opportunity, but that's how it is. And with that, but you still need the vision and also the technology to apply. But apart from the windows of opportunity, you also need the famous champions, or that goes together. I mean, if you, in certain cities where you really have the mayors, the famous champions, things move so quickly, and in others, nothing moves. But I would also agree to what my commenter said. It is much easier to go for cross-sectoral planning in cities than on national level. So according to my experience, the Urban Nexus, yes, it works in cities, it works easier in cities. What in the cities we are working in 12 cities, and there the cities, by resolution of the mayor, have created, they call it Nexus task forces. So these are official cross-sectoral task forces which are now responsible for screening the projects. And they sort of have kind of a green overlay or a checklist to see whether this is sort of Nexus compliant, yeah? And this works very nicely, and they are very motivated, and they say it's really good that we work that way. As soon as it comes to national level, it becomes much more complicated, and the whole discussion and problems, etc., start. So this is a long way to get the national level convinced, but on the municipal level, normally the success is, and it's much easier to convince them that the Nexus approach yields fruits. And it's better to go for it than to go for, continue with the monosectoral approaches.
Taking up the issue of having a champion, do you see your project, Olfa, in your country as a kind of champion project which can be replicated in other parts of the country?
Obviously, yes. But it needs a lot of effort. Actually, in Tunisia, we have been targeting 50% of reuse since the year 2000. And again, this is on the table, and we are targeting again 50% by the year 2020. So you see that there is some obstacles in between. We have to be realistic, actually. This case study is a good example because there is a new case study which is very successful also. And this is following, and there is a kind of competition between the two. Who is doing best? Who is getting more fund? Because this is an incentive to go further in this experience. So I think this is a good example, not only for Tunisia, but also for other countries, like in, I don't know, in North Africa, or even in other countries where water scarcity is really an issue there. So I think, yes, we should, and the government should push toward this kind of experience and try to advertise it. So this is a very important, to expand reuse. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The last comment or question, Excellency, from the floor is. There a mic?
My name is Csaba Körsi. I'm working for the Hungarian president. And could I come back to the issue which was just left open, that it is much easier to find the Nexus implementation on local level cities than on national levels. We used to arrive to this point on most of these kind of conferences, and I think it is very understandable and very right and very logical. But isn't it time to put the question to ourselves, why on national level it is almost next to impossible? Why do I propose to tackle this issue? The SDGs were adopted by the governments. They took a kind of obligation that they will go for an integrated implementation. The second, the governments and the top national levels, parliaments, are and will be responsible for developing and adopting the national implementation strategies. Would it be logical to see the national implementation strategies being very vague on the Nexus, and we would expect cities to go for a very efficient implementation of the next issues? The third, on the top national levels, in the parliaments, people will be voting for the budget. And it makes a huge difference how the budget will be built. We can, of course, restructure the city budgets, but to run national projects and run national strategies, you will need budgets with a little bit different approach. I understand it is rather complicated, but isn't it time to come back to this issue? Why is it so complicated, and how should we make it more simple? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time at the moment. I think this was a quite important comment or question. What I think, wrapping a bit up today's session, that the case studies we had today, not only in this session, also before, show clearly that Nexus approach, the implementation of the Nexus approach, is a big challenge, and I put it in quotation marks, probably easier to implement on the local and the regional level, because they are closer to the practical issues, knowing that if I go in the wrong direction with water, this probably affects my soil quality in a long-term perspective, and I have problems with my agricultural land. But I think it is also important to learn from today that our administrative and legal systems on the national level are not really following a kind of system approach or a nexus approach. They are following a real, more sectoral water box or agricultural box oriented approach. So we also need, and this is what we learned today, a kind of transformation to come from a more sectoral-driven policy approach to a more nexus-driven policy approach, not to make the responsibilities of the sectors weaker. I think the measures to be implemented have to be implemented in the sector, but it has to be coherent with the overall approach. I think also it is important that we see, on one hand side, it's right to say, okay, a lot of progress had been triggered by shocks, but it had been also shocks more on the local and the regional level. If I see the shocks around the globe we are facing every day through TV, sometimes it seems that politicians are resistant to this kind of... resilient. Okay, you can also say resilient. So I think also this is important to see. And last but not least, I think stakeholder involvement. I think it was a very nice presentation that you said we have to involve, we involved the farmers in the process from the beginning, not in a top-down approach. We made sure that farmers had been able to learn that they can gain benefits from such a process. So the levels are important, and I think technical solutions are important, but technical solutions without good governance structures, without good monitoring and implementation approaches will not succeed at the end of the day, because technologies in the end, without governance structures, without the involvement of people, without having incentives, I think will fail. So far, I think we had a rich debate today, and I think we also learned from the various cases that one important issue, which is very often, Rudolph, there is no politician probably sitting. Yeah, okay. I would not say that he belongs to the caste of the politicians in a traditional way. But I think it is also important to make sure because we are in a conference which is also scientifically driven. What was also said this morning, we have to have a proper communication from science to policy, that politicians are able to follow and to understand what is scientific evidence and how to work with that. So I think this was a rich day with really rich sessions, and I would like to ask Reza Ardakanyan for the last 2 minutes. Reza, the floor is yours. I would like to thank the 3 presenters. I would like to thank the 2 commenters, and I hope very much if you give an applause for them.